Marcus Fleming thought he knew poverty until the film trucks arrived at his dying peach orchard, their chrome bumpers reflecting more money than he'd seen in years. The mysterious woman who'd been painting quietly in his shade for weeks stepped out of the lead trailer wearing designer clothes that cost more than his annual income. And when she offered him a consultant contract worth 6 figures, he realized his simple act of kindness had just saved his farm, his future, and possibly his heart. But as Hollywood glamour collided with rural reality, one question burned in his mind. Could a struggling farmer really belong in her glittering world of make-believe? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fleming peach orchard, illuminating rows of trees that had seen better decades. Marcus Fleming stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug warming his calloused hands as he surveyed the 100 acres that had been in his family for 4 generations. The trees looked tired, their branches sparse with fruit that would barely cover the cost of harvesting. At 34, Marcus felt as weathered as the old farmhouse behind him, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin. The drought had been merciless for 3 consecutive summers, and the bank notices had grown increasingly urgent with each passing month. His grandfather's legacy was slipping through his fingers like the sandy soil that refused to hold enough moisture. Marcus had tried everything, from new irrigation systems he couldn't afford, to organic farming methods that yielded beautiful but insufficient crops. The local farmers market brought in just enough to keep the lights on, but barely. As he stepped onto the wraparound porch, the familiar creak of the third board reminded him of all the repairs he'd been postponing. The list seemed endless, like his father's debts that had passed to him along with the deed. His truck, a rust-colored Ford from the late 90s, sat in the gravel driveway with its tailgate down, ready for another day of hauling produce to town and hoping for the best. The sound of footsteps on gravel interrupted his morning routine. A woman approached from the dirt road that connected his property to the main highway, her stride confident despite the uneven terrain. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a cotton blouse, with paint-stained fingers that suggested an artistic inclination. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a large canvas bag slung over her shoulder. "Excuse me," she called out as she reached the edge of his property. "I'm wondering if I might have permission to set up an easel in your orchard. I'm working on a series of landscape paintings, and your peach trees have the most beautiful light filtering through them." Marcus set his coffee mug on the porch railing and walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. Up close, he noticed her eyes were an unusual shade of green, like sea glass he'd once found on a rare family vacation to the coast. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with laugh lines that suggested she smiled often despite the serious expression she wore now. "I'm Marcus Fleming," he said, extending his hand. "This is my property. Though I have to warn you, it's not much to look at these days." "I'm Claire," she replied, accepting his handshake with surprising firmness. "And I disagree completely. There's something haunting about the way the morning light catches in those branches. The interplay between hope and struggle, if you don't mind me getting a bit philosophical about your trees." Her words struck him as oddly perceptive. Most people saw only the obvious decline, the thin fruit hanging like disappointed promises from branches that should have been heavy with abundance. But she seemed to see something deeper, something that spoke to the resilience that kept him working these fields despite the mounting challenges. "You're welcome to paint here," Marcus said, surprising himself with how quickly he'd made the decision. "I just ask that you be careful of the irrigation lines, and don't pick any fruit without asking. Not that there's much worth picking this year." Claire's face brightened with genuine gratitude. "Thank you so much. I promise I'll be invisible. I usually work in the early morning and late afternoon when the light is best. I'll stay out of your way completely." "What kind of paintings do you do?" Marcus asked, curious despite himself. It had been months since he'd had a conversation with someone who wasn't trying to collect money from him or offer unwanted advice about farming techniques. "Landscapes mostly, though I've been experimenting with some different approaches lately. I'm working on capturing the essence of places rather than just their appearance. Your orchard has this quality of endurance, like it's weathered every storm and is still standing proud." Marcus looked back at his trees with fresh eyes, trying to see what she saw. The morning light did create interesting patterns through the leaves, casting dappled shadows that shifted with each gentle breeze. Perhaps there was beauty in the struggle, though he'd been too close to the daily grind to notice it. "Well, make yourself at home," he said. "I'll be working around the property most days, so if you need anything, just holler." "Actually, would it be all right if I paid you something for the privilege? I know times are tough for farmers, and I don't want to impose without offering something in return." Marcus started to refuse, the automatic pride that came from generations of self-reliance rising in his throat, but the mortgage payment due next week made him reconsider. "That's kind of you to offer, but it's not necessary. Having someone appreciate the place is payment enough." Claire studied his face for a moment, as if she could read the financial stress he tried to hide. "How about I bring you coffee sometimes? I pass a really good cafe on my drive out here, and it seems like you could use some company during your morning routine." The offer was simple, but touched something in Marcus that had been dormant for too long. When was the last time anyone had thought to bring in coffee, or even cared about his daily routines? Since his father's death 2 years ago, the conversations in his life had been limited to transactions, obligations, and the steady drumbeat of creditors. "That sounds nice," he admitted. "I usually start my day around 6, checking the irrigation before it gets too hot." "Perfect. I'm an early riser myself." Claire adjusted the strap of her bag and glanced toward the orchard. "Would it be all right if I started this afternoon? The evening light looks spectacular from here." "Suit yourself. I'll be working on the tractor most of the day, trying to get the cultivator attachment working properly. It's been acting up, and I can't afford to have it serviced professionally." "I'm pretty good with mechanical things if you need an extra pair of hands," Claire offered. "I grew up on a farm myself, before life took me in different directions." Marcus felt a spark of surprise. She didn't look like someone who'd grown up working the land, though he supposed farming backgrounds came in all shapes. "Where was your family's farm?" "Iowa. Corn and soybeans mostly. My father always said farming was in the blood, but I chose a different path after college." There was a note of something wistful in her voice, as if she'd left more behind than just geography. "Well, the offer for help is appreciated, but I've been wrestling with that tractor for 15 years. We understand each other's moods by now." Claire laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the morning air. "Fair enough. I'll stick to what I know best and try to capture some of that stubborn beauty you've got growing here." As she walked toward the orchard, Marcus watched her navigate between the trees with careful steps, clearly respectful of the space and the work it represented. She found a spot about 50 yards from the house, where the light fell particularly beautifully through the canopy, and began unpacking her supplies with efficient movements that spoke of long practice. Marcus returned to his coffee and his morning survey of the property, but found himself glancing toward Claire more often than he cared to admit. There was something calming about having another person nearby, someone who seemed to understand the rhythm of rural life without needing constant explanation or entertainment. True to her word, Claire arrived the next morning with 2 cups of coffee from what must have been an expensive cafe in town, judging by the quality of the brew. She handed him one without fanfare and settled into her painting spot while he went about his morning routine of checking water pressure and examining the fruit for signs of pest damage. "How long have you been painting?" Marcus called out during a break in his work. "Professionally, about 8 years, Claire replied, not looking up from her canvas. "Though I've been holding a brush since I was old enough to reach a table. My mother used to set up little art stations for me when she was working in her garden." "What do you do with the paintings when they're finished?" "Various things. Some go to galleries, some are private commissions. I've been fortunate enough to make a living at it, though it took a while to build up a client base." Marcus nodded, impressed despite himself. Making a living as an artist seemed almost as challenging as making a living as a farmer, though probably with better insurance benefits. "Must be nice to travel around painting different places." "It has its perks, though sometimes I miss having roots in one place. There's something to be said for knowing every tree and stone on a piece of land." Her words resonated with a longing Marcus understood completely. Despite the financial struggles, despite the constant worry and back-breaking work, there was a deep satisfaction in belonging somewhere completely. His great-grandfather had planted the first peach trees on this land, and Marcus could trace the family history in the growth rings of the oldest specimens. "This land has been in my family for 4 generations," Marcus said, surprising himself by sharing something so personal with a near stranger. "My great-grandfather started with 20 acres and a mule. Each generation added to it, improved it, tried to leave it better than they found it, and now it's your turn to carry that forward. If I can manage it." It. The admission slipped out before he could stop it, along with the weight of worry he carried daily. Claire looked up from her painting, her expression thoughtful. "You strike me as someone who doesn't give up easily. This orchard might be struggling, but it's still standing. That says something about both the land and the person tending it." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks at the unexpected compliment. When was the last time someone had acknowledged his efforts, rather than pointing out his failures? The bank certainly didn't see his determination, only the missed payments and declining property values. "Some days, it feels like I'm just delaying the inevitable," Marcus admitted. "The drought, the market prices, the cost of everything going up, while what I can charge stays the same. But you're still here." "I'm still here," he agreed, though he wasn't sure if that made him persistent or just stubborn. As the days passed, Claire became a familiar presence in the orchard. She worked quietly, rarely interrupting his routines but somehow making the property feel less lonely. Marcus found himself looking forward to their brief conversations, the way she noticed details about the land that others missed, the thoughtful questions she asked about farming techniques and family history. She brought coffee most mornings, always from the same expensive cafe, and Marcus began to wonder how she afforded such luxuries on an artist's income. Her clothes were simple but well-made, her art supplies clearly professional quality. There was something about her that suggested more resources than she let on, though she never acted superior or out of place among the practical surroundings of the farm. "You mentioned you grew up on a farm in Iowa," Marcus said one morning as they shared coffee on his porch. "Do you ever miss it?" "Every day," Claire replied without hesitation. "There's a rhythm to farm life that you never really leave behind. The way you can feel weather coming in your bones, the satisfaction of work that connects directly to the earth. I chose a different path, but part of me always wonders what might have been different if I'd stayed." "What made you leave?" Claire was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the orchard where morning mist was rising from the irrigation channels. "College, initially. Art school in Chicago, then opportunities that took me further and further from home. By the time I realized what I'd given up, it felt too late to go back." "It's never too late," Marcus said, meaning it. "Land has a way of welcoming people home, even after they've been gone for years." "Maybe," Claire said softly, "though I'm not sure I remember how to belong in that world anymore." Marcus studied her profile as she gazed at his struggling trees with such obvious affection. "You seem to fit here just fine. The orchard likes having you around. I can tell." "How can you tell?" "The way the light falls differently when you're working. The trees seem to stand a little straighter, like they're posing for their portrait." Claire turned to look at him, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than their casual conversations. Marcus felt his pulse quicken and looked away, reminding himself that she was temporary, just passing through his life like so many other things he couldn't afford to get attached to. "I should get back to work," he said, standing abruptly. "The irrigation system needs attention before the heat gets too intense." "Of course. I'll be in my usual spot if you need anything." As Marcus walked toward the equipment shed, he could feel Claire watching him go. There was a weight to her attention that made him self-conscious about his worn work clothes and the patches on his jeans that his grandmother had sewn years ago. What must she think of his circumstances? This sophisticated artist who drove out from town every day to paint his failing orchard? The morning routine continued for 2 weeks, coffee and brief conversations that gradually revealed layers of personality and history. Marcus learned that Claire had studied at prestigious art schools, had lived in New York and Los Angeles, had traveled extensively for her work. In return, he shared stories about growing up on the farm, the lessons his father and grandfather had taught him about reading the land and weather, the deep satisfaction of nurturing something from seed to harvest. "You talk about farming like it's an art form," Claire observed one morning as Marcus explained his approach to pruning the peach trees. Isn't it, in a way? You're working with living things, trying to create something beautiful and useful. There's intuition involved, and timing, and years of learning from mistakes. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. There's definitely creativity in the way you've arranged these plantings, the way you've worked with the natural slope of the land. Marcus looked around his property with fresh eyes, trying to see it through her artist's perspective. He'd always focused on the practical aspects, efficiency and yield and pest management, but there was an aesthetic element to the way he'd laid out the irrigation lines, the paths between tree rows, the relationship between the orchard and the old farmhouse. My grandfather always said farming was about partnership, working with the land instead of against it. Maybe that's where the art comes in. Definitely. Some of the most beautiful landscapes I've painted have been places where people worked in harmony with the natural environment. There's a different quality to the light, the way everything fits together. Their conversations had begun to feel like a luxury Marcus couldn't afford, time stolen from the endless list of chores that kept the farm barely functional. But Claire's presence had become something he looked forward to, a bright spot in days that often felt overwhelmingly difficult. Then one morning she didn't come. Marcus waited longer than usual, his coffee growing cold as he watched the road for her familiar figure. When she still hadn't appeared by 8 o'clock, he felt a disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. Had something happened to her? Had she simply grown bored with painting the same orchard day after day? The morning felt wrong without her quiet presence among the trees. Marcus found himself glancing toward her usual spot throughout the day, expecting to see her easel set up in the dappled shade. When evening came, she still hadn't appeared. He wondered if he'd somehow offended her during their last conversation. She returned 3 days later with an apology and an explanation that she'd had to make an unexpected trip to Los Angeles for work. Marcus felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by embarrassment at how much her absence had affected him. I missed our morning coffee, Claire said, handing him a cup from the expensive cafe. And I missed watching you work with those trees. You have such a natural rhythm with them. I missed having you around too, Marcus admitted. The orchard felt empty without someone appreciating it properly. Well, I'm back now, and I have some good news. I finished the painting I'd been working on here, and I'd love to show it to you sometime. I think I managed to capture some of that enduring quality we talked about. I'd like to see it, Marcus said, meaning it completely. Claire's work schedule seemed to intensify after her return from Los Angeles. She still came most mornings, but often spent time on her phone dealing with what sounded like complicated professional arrangements. Marcus caught fragments of conversations about locations and schedules, budgets and timelines that seemed far more complex than he'd expected for landscape painting. Big commission? He asked one morning after she'd spent 20 minutes on a call that involved detailed technical discussions. Something like that, Claire replied, but she seemed distracted, less present than usual. Marcus sensed that something had changed during her trip to Los Angeles, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. She still brought coffee and set up her easel in the same spot, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before, as if she was working towards some deadline that created pressure rather than joy. Is everything all right? He asked finally, unable to ignore the subtle shift in her demeanor. Claire looked up from her canvas, paintbrush poised in midair. Yes, of course. Just some work complications that need sorting out. Nothing for you to worry about. But Marcus did worry, though he couldn't have explained why. After weeks of growing comfortable with Claire's presence, her sudden distraction felt like a warning that their easy routine was about to change. He'd become accustomed to having someone who saw beauty in his struggling orchard, someone who understood the deep connection between a person and their land. That evening, as Marcus worked on repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm, he found himself thinking about Claire's phone conversations and the professional complexity they'd revealed. What kind of artist needed to coordinate schedules and budgets with the intensity he'd overheard? And why had she been so vague about the nature of her work when he'd asked directly? The questions followed him through his evening routine and into a restless night's sleep. When he woke before dawn, as had become his habit since Claire started visiting, He felt an inexplicable sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Something was coming, some change that would disrupt the peaceful rhythm they'd established. Claire arrived that morning with coffee as usual, but her demeanor was different, more formal somehow. She set up her easel with efficient movements and began working immediately, without the easy conversation that had become their morning ritual. "Claire," Marcus said after watching her paint in unusual silence for half an hour, "if something's wrong, you can tell me. I mean, we're friends now, aren't we?" She set down her brush and turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to react." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. After weeks of growing closer, was she about to announce that she was leaving? That her work here was finished and she was moving on to the next location, the next landscape that needed capturing? "Whatever it is, just tell me straight," Marcus said, though his stomach was already tightening with anticipation of bad news. "My name is Claire Montgomery, and I'm not exactly the kind of artist you think I am." Marcus felt confusion mixed with his growing apprehension. "What do you mean?" "I design sets for movies and television shows, major productions, big-budget films. I've been working in Hollywood for 8 years, and I'm considered one of the best in the business." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Claire wasn't just some traveling landscape painter. She was part of the entertainment industry, the glamorous world that seemed as far from his reality as another planet. But even as shock registered, questions began forming in his mind. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" "Because I needed to see this place authentically, without you trying to impress me or change things for my benefit. I'm scouting locations for a major film, and your orchard has exactly the qualities we're looking for." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet, not literally, but emotionally. Everything about their relationship suddenly took on different meaning. The careful attention she'd paid to the layout of his property, the detailed questions about farming techniques, the way she'd studied the light and shadows throughout different times of day. "You want to film a movie here?" "Not just any movie. $100 million production with a list actors and a director who's won 3 Academy Awards. And I want to hire you as a consultant to help us recreate your orchard on a studio lot in Los Angeles." The magnitude of what she was offering began to sink in slowly, like water seeping into drought-hardened soil. A major Hollywood production, with the kind of budget that could solve every financial problem he faced, and probably secure the future of his farm for generations. "How much?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. $200,000 for location scouting and consultation, plus additional compensation if we end up using your property for any actual filming. And that's just the beginning. If this film is successful, and I believe it will be, there could be other opportunities." Marcus sat down heavily on his porch steps, trying to process information that seemed too large for his reality. $200,000 was more money than he'd made in the past 5 years combined. It would pay off the mortgage, upgrade his equipment, fund the improvements he'd been dreaming about but couldn't afford. "Why my orchard specifically? There must be hundreds of farms you could choose from." Claire sat down beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the paint and turpentine scents he'd grown accustomed to. "Because this place has something that can't be manufactured or designed. It has authenticity, the weight of generations of real work and real struggle. When I paint landscapes for film sets, I'm usually creating an idealized version of rural life. But your orchard tells a true story, and that's what the director wants to capture." "What's the movie about?" "It's about a family farm facing foreclosure, the conflict between preserving tradition and adapting to change. The main character is a farmer who has to decide whether to sell his family's land to developers or find a way to keep it in agriculture." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Claire had found his orchard while he was living the exact story her film wanted to tell, struggling to save his family's legacy from economic forces beyond his control. But instead of losing the farm to developers, he was being offered a chance to save it through Hollywood magic. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said finally. "Of course. This is a big decision, and I should have been honest with you from the beginning. I apologize for that. I got caught up in enjoying the simplicity of our friendship, and I didn't want to complicate it with business discussions. Marcus looked at Claire with new eyes, trying to reconcile the woman he'd grown fond of with this revelation about her professional life. "So, when you brought me coffee every morning, was that part of your job too?" "No," Claire said firmly. "That was completely personal. I genuinely enjoyed our conversations, Marcus. Getting to know you, learning about your connection to this land, watching you work with such dedication despite all the challenges you're facing. None of that was professional research." End quote. "But it didn't hurt your professional goals either." Claire was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her weighing her words carefully. "You're right. Everything I learned about you and this place informed my professional opinion about its suitability for our project. But that doesn't mean my feelings about spending time here were genuine." Marcus stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the orchard that had suddenly become valuable in ways he'd never imagined. The struggling peach trees, the irrigation system held together with hope and improvisation, the weathered farmhouse that needed so many repairs, all of it was exactly what a major film production wanted to recreate. "What happens to my farm if I say yes? Do you tear everything up to build sets?" "Actually, we'd probably do most of the filming on constructed sets in Los Angeles. We'd need detailed measurements and photographs of everything, samples of materials, extensive documentation of how the light changes throughout the day. Your role would be to help us recreate this place authentically, to make sure we get all the details right. And if I say no, then I find another location, and we never speak of this again. But Marcus, this opportunity won't come around twice. The kind of money we're offering could change your entire future." Marcus knew she was right. $200,000 would not only save his farm, but position it for real success. He could upgrade his irrigation system, replant with newer varieties of peach trees that were more drought-resistant, maybe even expand into other crops. The financial security would allow him to think beyond mere survival for the first time in years. But accepting would also mean entering a world he knew nothing about, working with people who lived lives completely different from his own. Could a struggling farmer really function as a consultant to Hollywood producers? What if he embarrassed himself or proved inadequate to their sophisticated expectations? "I'm going to need more than just time to think," Marcus said. "I need to understand exactly what you're asking me to do, what the timeline looks like, what would be expected of me." "Fair enough. I can have the production company send you a formal proposal with all the details spelled out. But Marcus, I want you to know that I recommended you not just because your orchard is perfect for our needs, but because I believe you'd bring something invaluable to the project. Your understanding of this life, your authenticity, your eye for the details that make a place real." "When do you need an answer?" "Soon. We're hoping to begin construction on the sets within 6 weeks, which means I need to finalize the location scouting and consultant arrangements." Marcus nodded, his mind spinning with implications and possibilities. 6 weeks to make a decision that could change everything about his life, his future, his relationship with the land that had defined his family for 4 generations. "Will you still come paint in the mornings while I'm deciding?" Claire smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression he'd seen from her since her revelation. "If you'll still have me. Though I should warn you, there might be other people from the production company who want to visit the property, take photographs, do technical assessments. As long as they don't interfere with the irrigation schedule or damage anything, they'll be completely respectful. These are professionals who understand the value of what you've built here." That evening, Marcus sat on his porch long after sunset, trying to imagine his life transformed by Hollywood money and Hollywood connections. The crickets sang their familiar chorus from the orchard, and the scent of ripening peaches drifted on the warm air. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but somehow the entire landscape felt different now that he knew its value extended beyond agricultural productivity. He thought about his grandfather, who had expanded the original 20 acres through decades of careful reinvestment and gradual growth. What would the old man think about his great-grandson selling the orchard's image to movie studios? Would he see it as a betrayal of farming traditions or a clever adaptation to changing times? Marcus pulled out his phone and called his cousin Jake, who farmed wheat and corn about 50 miles north. Jake had always been the business-minded member of the family, the one who stayed current with agricultural innovations and marketing strategies. "You're not going to believe what just happened," Marcus began, and then laid out the entire story, from Claire's first appearance at his property to her revelation about the film project. $200,000? Jake whistled low. "Marcus, that's more than you've grossed in the past 3 years combined. You'd be crazy not to take it. But what if I mess it up? What if I don't know enough about their world to be helpful?" "You know more about farming than anyone in Hollywood, that's guaranteed. And you know your property better than anyone else possibly could. They're not hiring you to be a movie expert. They're hiring you to be a farm expert." Jake's perspective helped clarify some of Marcus's concerns, but deeper questions remained. What would it mean for his relationship with Claire, which had been built on the assumption that they were from similar worlds? How would he navigate the professional expectations of people accustomed to multi-million-dollar budgets and celebrity personalities? The next morning, Claire arrived with coffee and a thick envelope containing the formal proposal from the production company. Marcus accepted both with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from caffeine withdrawal or nervous anticipation, he couldn't tell. "Read through everything carefully," Claire advised. "If you have questions, I can put you in touch with the production lawyer who drafted the contract. But I think you'll find the terms are quite generous." Marcus opened the envelope and scanned the first page, which outlined compensation, timeline, and general expectations. The numbers were even more impressive in official typeface, and the scope of the project began to come into focus. They wanted comprehensive documentation of his farming methods, detailed architectural measurements of all buildings, consultation on set construction, and availability for ongoing questions during filming. This says the project could extend over 8 months, possibly longer if the film is successful and leads to sequels or related projects. "The entertainment industry works differently from most businesses, Marcus. When they find something that works, they want to use it." Repeatedly, Marcus continued reading, trying to understand legal language that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify meaning. But the core elements were clear enough. This was a legitimate offer from a major studio, with payment schedules and professional obligations that would transform his economic situation completely. "There's something else you should know," Claire said as Marcus reached the final pages of the contract. "The director wants to meet you before making a final decision. He's flying out from Los Angeles next week to see the property and discuss the project with you directly." The prospect of meeting a famous film director on his struggling farm sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Marcus's chest. "What's he like?" "David Richardson? He's brilliant, demanding, and he has very specific ideas about authenticity. But he's also fair, and he respects people who know their craft. Just be yourself, Marcus." That's exactly what he's looking for. Easy for you to say. You work with these people all the time. Actually, this would be my first project with David. His reputation is intimidating even for experienced people in the industry. But I've seen how you handle challenges, how you adapt and problem solve. Under pressure, you'll do fine. Claire's confidence in him felt good, but Marcus wasn't sure it was justified. Managing a failing farm was one kind of pressure. Dealing with Hollywood expectations was probably something else entirely. Still, the potential rewards were too significant to dismiss out of fear. When exactly is he coming? Tuesday afternoon. He'll want to see the orchard during different lighting conditions, probably stay for several hours. I'll be here to facilitate introductions and handle any technical questions about the film. Requirements. Marcus nodded, already mentally preparing for the most important meeting of his professional life. He'd need to clean up the farmhouse, make sure the orchard looked as good as possible, prepare intelligent answers to questions about farming techniques and family history. "Claire, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Of course? Why did you decide to tell me the truth? You could have just completed your scouting and made the offer without explaining about the deception." Claire set down her coffee and looked out at the orchard, where she'd spent so many morning hours painting. "Because I started caring about you, and about this place, in ways that went beyond professional interest. I realized I was using our friendship to gather information, and that felt wrong. You deserved to know who I really was and what I was really doing here. And now that I know, now I hope we can move forward as both friends and professional collaborators. But I understand if the deception changes how you feel about spending time together." Marcus considered her words carefully. The revelation had certainly changed his perception of their relationship, but it hadn't eliminated the connection he'd felt developing between them. If anything, knowing that she'd chosen honesty over professional convenience made him respect her more. "I'm glad you told me," Marcus said finally. "And I'm glad you thought our friendship was worth protecting." Relief flickered across Claire's features. "Does that mean you'll consider the offer seriously?" "I'll consider it very seriously, but I need to understand exactly what I'd be getting into before I make any commitments." The weekend passed slowly as Marcus read and reread the contract, researched the director and the production company online, and tried to imagine himself in the role they were offering. The internet revealed that David Richardson had indeed won multiple Academy Awards, and his films were known for their attention to detail and authentic portrayal of American life. Marcus also learned that Claire Montgomery was highly regarded in her field, with credits on several major films that had been praised for their realistic production design. Seeing her professional accomplishments listed online made him realize how much she'd downplayed her success during their morning conversations. By Sunday evening, Marcus had made his decision, though he planned to wait until after meeting the director before announcing it. The money was too significant to refuse, and the opportunity to save his family's farm through his expertise, rather than by selling it, felt like exactly the kind of creative solution his grandfather would have appreciated. Tuesday morning brought unseasonably cool weather and nervous energy that made Marcus check his appearance in the bathroom mirror more times than he cared to admit. He'd chosen his newest work clothes and spent extra time cleaning his boots, though he suspected nothing he owned would look particularly impressive to someone accustomed to Hollywood glamour. Claire arrived early with coffee and moral support. "Remember, David is coming here because he needs what you have to offer. You're not auditioning for his approval, you're demonstrating your expertise." "That's a nice way to think about it, but I still feel like I'm about to be judged by standards I don't understand. Trust me, authenticity is the standard that matters most. David can spot fakeness from miles away, but he responds to people who are genuinely connected to their work." At exactly 2 o'clock, a black SUV pulled into Marcus's gravel driveway, followed by a second vehicle carrying what appeared to be camera equipment and technical staff. David Richardson emerged from the first car looking exactly like Marcus had imagined a famous director would look. Expensive casual clothes and an aura of contained intensity. "Mr. Fleming," Richardson said, extending his hand with a firm grip. "Thank you for allowing us to visit your property. Claire has told me remarkable things about your orchard and your approach to farming." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Richardson. I have to admit, this is the first time I've met anyone from the movie business. Please, call me David. And I hope you'll find that we're not as different as you might expect. I grew up in rural Oregon, and some of my best childhood memories involve helping my uncle with his apple orchard." Marcus felt some of his tension ease. "What brought you from Oregon orchards to Hollywood?" "Stories," David replied simply. "I realized that the most powerful films come from real places and real places. Experiences. That's why your property interests me so much. Claire says it has an authenticity that can't be manufactured." As they walked toward the orchard, David's attention to detail became immediately apparent. He noticed the way Marcus had arranged the irrigation lines to follow the natural contours of the land, the strategic placement of equipment sheds to minimize disruption to the tree rows, the subtle signs of generations of careful stewardship. "Tell me about your pruning philosophy," David said, stopping beside a mature peach tree whose branches had been shaped with obvious skill. Marcus relaxed into familiar territory, explaining how his grandfather had taught him to read each tree's individual needs, how pruning was as much about understanding the plant's natural growth patterns as imposing human design upon them. David listened with the intensity of someone taking mental notes, occasionally asking follow-up questions that revealed genuine understanding of agricultural principles. "The film we're making deals with the tension between tradition and progress," David explained as they reached Claire's usual painting spot. "Your orchard embodies that perfectly, the way you've adapted old techniques to modern challenges without losing the essential character of the place." "It's been a learning process," Marcus admitted. "Every season teaches me something new about working with the land instead of fighting against it." That's exactly the kind of wisdom we want to capture. The main character in our film faces similar challenges, trying to save his family's farm while the world changes around him. We need someone who understands that struggle from the inside. David spent the next 2 hours examining every aspect of the property. From the weathered barn where Marcus stored his equipment, to the farmhouse kitchen with its vintage appliances and hand-sewn curtains. His questions revealed an encyclopedic knowledge of film production techniques, but also genuine curiosity about farming life. "The light here is extraordinary," David observed, as afternoon shadows began lengthening across the orchard. Claire was right about the quality of illumination filtering through these branches. It has a nostalgic quality, without being sentimental. "Different times of day create completely different moods," Marcus said, warming to the subject. "Morning light is hopeful, full of possibility. Evening light is more reflective, sometimes melancholy. And when storm clouds build up in late afternoon, the whole orchard takes on this dramatic intensity." "You see light like a cinematographer," David said with obvious approval. "That's going to be invaluable when we're trying to recreate these conditions on a soundstage." Claire had been quietly documenting their conversation, taking notes and photographs that would inform the eventual set construction. Marcus caught her eye several times and saw encouragement in her expression, confirmation that the meeting was proceeding better than he'd dared hope. "Mr. Fleming," David said as they completed their circuit of the property, "I'd like to make you a formal offer to join our production team. Claire has outlined the basic terms, but I want to add some additional elements based on what I've seen today." "What kind of additional elements?" "First, I'd like you to visit our Los Angeles facilities during set construction, to provide hands-on guidance as we recreate your orchard. Second, I want you available during filming for consultation on any questions about farming authenticity that arise. And third, I'd like to option your life story for potential development as a follow-up project." The magnitude of what David was proposing left Marcus momentarily speechless. Not only would he be paid handsomely for his expertise on the current film, but his own struggles to save the family farm might become the subject of future Hollywood attention. "You want to make a movie about my life? I want the option to do so. Your story, a fourth-generation farmer fighting to preserve his family's legacy despite drought and economic hardship, has all the elements of compelling drama. And if this film is successful, audiences will be hungry for more authentic rural stories." Marcus looked around his property with entirely new eyes. The peeling paint on the farmhouse, the hand-repaired equipment in the barn, the irrigation system cobbled together from decades of incremental improvements, all of it might become the raw material for Hollywood storytelling. "I need to ask you something honestly," Marcus said to David. "Do you really think someone like me can contribute meaningfully to a major film production? I've never been further from home than the State Fair, and I don't know anything about your industry. Mr. Fleming, I've made 12 films over the past 15 years, and every single one has succeeded because I surrounded myself with people who knew more than I did about specific subjects. I know how to tell stories and direct actors, but I don't know how to make a peach tree look authentically cared for or neglected. I don't know the difference between proper irrigation technique and Hollywood fakery. That's why I need you." David's words carried conviction that made Marcus believe he truly was valued for his expertise, rather than being patronized for his naivety. The respect in the director's voice when he talked about farming techniques felt genuine, not the condescending attitude Marcus had sometimes encountered from city people who romanticized rural life without understanding its complexities. "When would you need an answer?" "Soon, but not immediately. Take a few days to think it over, discuss it with family or advisors. This is a significant commitment that will change your life in ways you probably can't anticipate yet." After David and his team departed, Marcus and Claire sat on the porch, watching the sun set through the peach trees. The evening light created exactly the kind of nostalgic beauty David had praised. Golden rays filtering through leaves that rustled with each gentle breeze. "How do you think it went?" Marcus asked. "Better than I expected, and I expected it to go well." "David was genuinely impressed with you, Marcus. I could see it in his body language, the way he listened to your explanations. It's still hard to believe this is really happening. 3 months ago I was wondering if I'd lose the farm by Christmas, And now Hollywood wants to pay me more money than I've ever seen to talk about farming techniques. Life has a way of surprising us, Claire said softly. Sometimes the things we think are our greatest weaknesses turn out to be our most valuable assets. Marcus considered her words, thinking about how his struggles to maintain an old-fashioned farm and a modern economy had positioned him perfectly for David's needs. The very authenticity that made his operation financially precarious was exactly what the entertainment industry wanted to purchase and recreate. Claire, can I ask you something that's been bothering me? What happens between us if I take this job? We'll be working together professionally, but we started as friends. I don't want to lose that. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus worried that he'd overstepped some boundary by assuming their friendship mattered to her as much as it did to him. I've been wondering the same thing, she admitted finally. I care about you, Marcus, both personally and professionally. But mixing business with personal relationships can be complicated, especially in Hollywood where the stakes are always high. Maybe we could figure it out as we go along. Maybe we could. Claire turned to look at him directly, and Marcus saw something in her expression that made his pulse quicken. I know this sounds presumptuous, but I hope you'll say yes to David's offer. Not just because it's good for the film, but because I think it could be good for you. You have so much to offer beyond this orchard, Marcus. You just haven't had the opportunity to discover it yet. Her words touched something deep in Marcus's chest, a longing he'd barely acknowledged even to himself. For years, he'd defined himself entirely by his connection to the family farm, measuring his worth by his ability to maintain what previous generations had built. The possibility that his value might extend beyond agricultural productivity felt both thrilling and terrifying. What if I embarrass myself? What if I get to Los Angeles and prove that I'm just a country farmer who doesn't belong in their sophisticated world? Then you'll learn and adapt, the same way you've learned to farm in drought conditions and adapt to 9S. Changing market demands. The skills that make you good at farming, attention to detail, problem solving, persistence, those are exactly the skills that make people successful in any field. Marcus wanted to believe her, but the gap between his reality and Hollywood glamour still seemed enormous. Could he really function effectively among people whose casual conversations involved budgets larger than his? Annual income? There's something else I need to tell you, Claire said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. If you accept David's offer, you'll be stepping into a world that can be incredibly seductive. The money, the attention, the sense of being part of something important and creative. It changes people, Marcus. Sometimes in good ways, sometimes not. Are you warning me away from the opportunity? I'm warning you to stay connected to who you are and what matters to you. I've seen talented people lose themselves in the Hollywood lifestyle. Forget what made them valuable in the first place. Your authenticity is your greatest asset, but it's also fragile. Marcus appreciated her honesty, even as it added another layer of complexity to his decision. Taking David's offer would mean not just financial security, but exposure to temptations and pressures he'd never experienced before. That night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to familiar sounds from the orchard. An owl called from the old oak tree his great-grandfather had left standing when he first cleared the land. The irrigation system cycled on with its reassuring mechanical rhythm. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another from the hills beyond his property. These were the sounds of his heritage, the audio landscape that had shaped 4 generations of his family. Would accepting Hollywood's offer mean leaving all of this behind? Or could he find a way to bridge both worlds? The next morning brought Claire's usual coffee delivery, but also news that complicated his decision even further. David called me last night, she said, settling into her usual spot with her easel. He's so impressed with your property and your knowledge that he wants to accelerate the timeline. Instead of 6 weeks to make a decision, he needs an answer by Friday. This Friday? That's only 3 days away. I know it's sudden, but the studio is pressuring him to finalize all location and consulting arrangements so they can release funds for set construction. David fought for as much time as he could get. Marcus felt panic rise in his chest. 3 days to make a decision that would determine the rest of his life seemed impossibly short, especially when he was still processing the emotional implications of everything that had changed between him and Claire. What happens if I need more time? Then they'll probably move on to their second choice location. David really wants to work with you, Marcus, but he can't hold up $100 million production indefinitely. The pressure of the shortened timeline forced Marcus to confront his true feelings about the opportunity. When he imagined declining David's offer and returning to his previous routine, he felt not relief, but disappointment. Somewhere in the past few days, he'd begun to want this chance more than he'd admitted to himself. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about staying connected to who I am," Marcus said to Claire. "What if accepting this opportunity is exactly who I'm supposed to be? What if my family's 4 generations of farming were preparation for something bigger than just maintaining this orchard?" That's a beautiful way to think about it. Your great-grandfather started with 20 acres and a mule. Each generation found ways to expand and improve. Maybe your contribution is taking the family's agricultural knowledge to an entirely new arena. Marcus spent Wednesday driving around the county, visiting other farms and talking to neighbors about their opinions on his situation. The responses were universally encouraging, though he sensed some envy beneath the congratulations. Every farmer he spoke with had struggled with similar economic pressures, and they all recognized the significance of the opportunity he'd been offered. His conversation with old Pete Richardson, whose family had farmed the adjacent property for 60 years, proved particularly enlightening. "Son, I've watched 4 generations of your family work that land," Pete said as they stood beside his chicken coop. "Every one of them found ways to adapt to changing times while keeping faith with what mattered most. Sounds to me like you're facing the same kind of decision they did, just with higher stakes." "You think my great-grandfather would understand?" "I think he'd be proud as hell that his farming legacy was valuable enough for Hollywood to pay premium prices for it. And I think he'd trust you to make the right choice about how to use that value." Pete's words resonated with Marcus throughout Wednesday evening and into Thursday morning. He'd been thinking about the decision as a choice between honoring his family's tradition and abandoning it for financial gain. But perhaps the real choice was between letting the tradition die slowly through economic attrition or finding a creative way to preserve and extend its influence. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that helped clarify his thinking even further. Jake, his cousin who farmed wheat and corn 50 miles north, drove over unannounced with a bottle of bourbon and a willingness to talk through the decision one more time. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," Jake said as they sat on the porch with drinks and watched shadows lengthen across the orchard. "You asked what I thought your grandfather would say about selling the farm's image to movie studios. And I think he'd say that farming has always been about making the best use of whatever resources you have available. Your great-great-grandfather came here with nothing but determination and found a way to make the land productive. Each generation since then has adapted to new challenges and opportunities." "So you think I should take the offer?" "I think you should take the offer and use the money to make this the best damn peach orchard in the state. Upgrade your irrigation, replant with better varieties, maybe expand into agritourism or specialty products. Use Hollywood money to build something that would make your ancestors proud." Jake's perspective helped Marcus see past the either-or, thinking that had been paralyzing him. He didn't have to choose between farming and filmmaking. He could use one to strengthen the other. The consultation fees from David's project could fund improvements that would secure the orchard's future for another generation. That evening, Marcus called Claire and asked her to meet him at the orchard early Friday morning before she was scheduled to call David with his decision. "I've made up my mind," Marcus said when Claire arrived with coffee and obvious nervousness about his answer. "But I want to discuss one more thing with you before I tell David yes." "What kind of thing?" "Personal thing. About us. About what happens to our friendship when we start working together professionally." Claire set down her coffee and gave him her full attention. "I've been thinking about that too." "What conclusions have you reached?" "That I don't want to lose what we've built here, even if everything else changes. These morning conversations, the way you see beauty in my struggling orchard, the comfort of having someone who understands both farming and art. I want to find a way to preserve that." "So do I," Claire said softly. "But we'll have to be careful, Marcus. Professional relationships in Hollywood can get complicated quickly, especially when money and creative egos are involved." "Then we'll be careful." though we'll also be honest with each other, the way you were honest about who you really were and why you were here." Claire smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression Marcus had seen from her since David's visit. "I think I can handle that if you can." "I can handle it." Marcus stood and offered Claire his hand. "Partners? Partners. Partners." She agreed, accepting his handshake with a grip that felt like a promise. An hour later, Marcus called David Richardson and accepted his offer to join the film production as agricultural consultant and location scout. The conversation was brief but warm, with David expressing genuine enthusiasm about their collaboration and promising to send detailed contracts and timeline information within the week. After hanging up, Marcus stood on his porch, looking out at the orchard that had suddenly become valuable in ways his great-grandfather could never have imagined. The struggling peach trees looked exactly the same as they had an hour earlier, but everything about his relationship to them had changed. Claire appeared beside him, having finished packing her painting supplies for what might be the last time in their familiar routine. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Terrifying and exciting in equal measure. Like standing at the edge of something vast that I can't see clearly yet." "That's probably exactly how your great-grandfather felt when he first saw this land and decided to plant an orchard." Marcus considered her words, thinking about the courage it must have taken for his ancestor to invest everything in 20 acres of raw land and the hope that peach trees would thrive in unfamiliar soil. Perhaps taking risks on impossible dreams was itself a family tradition he was continuing, rather than abandoning. "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "Next, we figure out how to recreate your orchard in Los Angeles while keeping everything that makes it special. Next, you discover that your knowledge and instincts are more valuable than you ever realized. Next, we see where this adventure takes us." The word adventure resonated with Marcus as he watched Claire load her art supplies into her car. For years, his life had been defined by routine, by the careful management of limited resources and shrinking possibilities. The opportunity David was offering represented not just financial security, but genuine adventure. The chance to discover capabilities he'd never had reason to develop. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself on an airplane for the first time in his life, watching the patchwork of agricultural land shrink below as he flew toward Los Angeles and his new role as Hollywood consultant. The contract in his briefcase guaranteed more money than he'd ever imagined earning. But more importantly, it represented validation that his lifetime of farming knowledge had value beyond the boundaries of his struggling orchard. Claire met him at the airport, looking perfectly at home in the urban sophistication of Los Angeles, but greeting him with the same warm smile he'd grown accustomed to during their morning coffee sessions. "Ready to see your orchard recreated by the best set designers in the business?" she asked as they drove through traffic that made Marcus grateful for the quiet roads around his farm. "Ready as I'll ever be. Though I have to admit, part of me is worried that you'll make it look better than the real thing." "That's exactly what we're hoping to avoid." David wants authentic struggle, not romanticized perfection. "We need your eye to keep us honest." Their first stop was a warehouse in Burbank, where construction had already begun on a replica of Marcus's farmhouse. The attention to detail was extraordinary. Every weathered board and hand-repaired shingle recreated with painstaking accuracy. But as Marcus walked through the partial structure, he noticed subtle differences that would matter to anyone who really understood farming life. "The kitchen window is too clean," Marcus observed, running his fingers along glass that sparkled with artificial perfection. "A real farmhouse window has water spots from washing dishes, maybe some paint overspray from 2 chop jobs around the frame." The set decorator made notes while Marcus continued his examination, pointing out dozens of small details that would make the difference between generic rural imagery and authentic agricultural reality. The work was fascinating, using his lifetime of accumulated knowledge in entirely new ways. Over the following days, Marcus found himself increasingly comfortable in his consultant role. The film crew treated him with respect that, quote, bordered on reverence, recognizing that his expertise could make or break the authenticity they were striving to achieve. Directors and designers who had worked on LE Academy Award-winning films sought his opinion on everything from the proper way to coil irrigation hose to the realistic placement of farm equipment. "You're a natural at this," Claire observed after Marcus had spent an entire afternoon working with the lighting team to recreate the specific quality of late afternoon illumination in his orchard. "It doesn't feel natural. It feels like speaking a foreign language that I'm learning surprisingly quickly." "Maybe that's because you've been speaking the language of authentic craftsmanship your whole life." Film production is just a different kind of craftsmanship, with the same attention to detail and the same commitment to getting things right. Claire's insight proved accurate as Marcus settled into the rhythm of Hollywood production. The skills that made him an effective farmer, careful observation, creative problem-solving, persistence in the face of setbacks, translated seamlessly to set design consultation. He discovered that he had an intuitive understanding of how to make artificial environments feel genuinely lived in. The breakthrough moment came during his third week in Los Angeles, when David asked him to work with the lead actor on developing an authentic portrayal of a fourth-generation farmer. "I need him to understand the weight of generational responsibility," David explained, as they watched the actor practice operating a replica of Marcus's old tractor. "The way caring for land that's been in your family for decades affects how you move through the world." Marcus spent hours with the actor, sharing stories about his grandfather's farming philosophy, demonstrating the subtle techniques for reading soil conditions and weather patterns, explaining the emotional complexity of loving work that barely provided financial survival. "It's not just about knowing farming techniques," Marcus told the actor during one of their sessions. "It's about understanding that you're part of something bigger than yourself, a chain of stewardship that connects you to people you've never met and people who haven't been born yet." The actor absorbed Marcus's lessons with the same intensity Marcus had once brought to learning his grandfather's pruning methods. Watching his knowledge and experience transformed into performance art felt both strange and deeply satisfying. "You should consider acting yourself," the actor suggested after a particularly productive afternoon. "You have a natural authenticity that's impossible to fake." Marcus laughed at the suggestion, but it planted a seed of possibility that grew over the following days. If his farming knowledge was valuable to Hollywood, perhaps other aspects of his personality and experience had undiscovered potential as well. The film's production schedule kept Marcus in Los Angeles for 6 weeks, long enough for him to develop genuine friendships with crew members and to feel comfortable navigating the social complexities of the entertainment industry. He learned to distinguish between genuine interest in his background and the superficial fascination with rural life that some Hollywood people displayed like a fashionable accessory. Claire remained his anchor throughout the experience, helping him interpret the unspoken rules of film industry culture while preserving the authenticity that made him valuable to the production. Their relationship deepened during late dinners after long days on set, conversations that explored the intersection of art and agriculture, tradition and innovation. "I keep thinking about something you said that first morning when you asked to paint in my orchard," Marcus told Claire over dinner at a restaurant that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. "You talked about capturing the essence of places rather than just their appearance." "I remember. What about it?" "I think that's what you've helped me do with my own life. Instead of just seeing the appearance of struggle and failure, you helped me recognize the essence of what I'd built, the value that wasn't obvious to casual observation." Claire reached across the table and touched his hand, a gesture that felt both natural and momentous in the elegant restaurant's surroundings. "You did that yourself, Marcus. I just provided a different perspective." "No, it was more than that. You saw possibilities I couldn't see, and you cared enough to take risks to help me discover them." Their conversation was interrupted by David Richardson, who approached their table with obvious excitement about some development in the film's post-production process. "Marcus, I just finished reviewing the first rough cut of scenes that incorporated your consultation work," David said, pulling up a chair without invitation. "The authenticity is extraordinary. Every detail feels lived in and real in ways that I've never achieved before." "That's great to hear, but I can't take credit for the filmmaking itself." "You can take credit for making the filmmaking possible. The difference between generic rural imagery and authentic agricultural reality is the difference between a good film and a great one." David's enthusiasm was infectious, and Marcus felt a pride in his contribution that was entirely different from the satisfaction of a successful harvest. This was creative accomplishment. the translation of his life experience into art that would reach audiences around the world. "There's something else I want to discuss with both of you," David continued. "The studio executives who've seen the early footage are so impressed with the authenticity that they want to fast-track development of the follow-up project based on Marcus's life story." The announcement hit Marcus like a physical blow. Throughout his weeks in Los Angeles, the possibility of his own story becoming a film had remained abstract, something that might happen in the distant future if the current project succeeded. But David was talking about immediate development, scripts, and casting, and production schedules. "How fast is Fast Track?" Claire asked, her voice carrying professional interest mixed with personal concern. "They want a treatment within 6 months, script within a year, and filming to begin as soon as we finish post-production on the current Pasker project. They're talking about a 2-picture deal with budgets that would make Marcus independently wealthy." Marcus tried to process information that seemed too large for his reality. A 2-picture deal meant multiple films based on his life, years of Hollywood involvement, transformation from struggling farmer, entertainment industry figure. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this have short shelf lives in Hollywood. Studio enthusiasm can disappear as quickly as it appears." After David left, Marcus and Claire sat in silence for several minutes, both trying to absorb the implications of what they'd just heard. "It's a lot," Claire said finally. "It's everything I never knew I wanted," Marcus replied, "and everything I'm terrified of wanting too much." They talked until the restaurant closed, exploring the possibilities and pitfalls of Marcus's expanding Hollywood career. The financial security was undeniable, but the personal costs were harder to calculate. How much of his authentic self could he preserve while becoming a public figure whose life story was packaged for mass entertainment? There's no rule that says you have to choose between your farming life and your Hollywood opportunities, Claire pointed out as they walked through the warm Los Angeles evening toward her apartment. Plenty of people successfully manage careers in multiple fields. But I don't want to become one of those people who's famous for being famous, who loses track of what made them interesting in the first place. Then don't. Use the platform and the resources to do things that matter to you. Become an advocate for small-scale agriculture. Support other farmers facing foreclosure. Help preserve agricultural traditions that might otherwise disappear. Claire's suggestions sparked ideas that Marcus hadn't considered. Ways to leverage his unexpected fame for purposes beyond personal enrichment. Perhaps his Hollywood success could become a tool for supporting the farming community that had shaped his identity. The next morning, Marcus called David and accepted the studio's offer to develop his life story for film adaptation, but he also requested creative control over how farming life was portrayed, ensuring that any movies based on his experience would represent agricultural reality accurately, rather than perpetuating romantic myths about rural life. His remaining weeks in Los Angeles passed quickly, filled with meetings with screenwriters, discussions with producers, and planning sessions for his ongoing role as the production company's agricultural authenticity consultant. By the time he boarded the plane back home, Marcus had signed contracts that guaranteed his financial security for decades and established him as Hollywood's go-to expert on farming authenticity. Claire had arranged to return to the orchard with him, ostensibly to complete some final documentation for the set construction, but really to help him transition back to his regular life after 6 weeks of Hollywood intensity. "How does it feel to be home?" she asked as they stood in the familiar kitchen of his farmhouse, surrounded by the simple furniture and practical appliances that the set designers had recreated with such painstaking accuracy. Like I've been away for years instead of weeks. Everything looks exactly the same, but I feel completely different." "Different how?" Marcus looked out the kitchen window at his peach orchard, where late afternoon light filtered through leaves exactly as it had on that first morning when Claire had asked permission to paint. The irrigation system cycled on with its familiar mechanical rhythm, and the scent of ripening fruit drifted through the open windows. "Different, like I finally understand what this place really is," Marcus said. "Not just a struggling farm that's barely financially viable, but a repository of knowledge and tradition that has value beyond agricultural productivity." "And what are you going to do with that understanding?" Marcus smiled, feeling more certain about his future than he had in years. I'm going to use Hollywood money to make this the most successful small-scale organic orchard in the state. I'm going to create educational programs that teach sustainable farming techniques to the next generation, and I'm going to work with you to document agricultural traditions before they disappear. With me? If you're interested. David mentioned that the studio wants to develop a documentary series about traditional American farming methods. I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with on something like that. Claire's smile was brighter than the afternoon light streaming through the farmhouse windows. I'd love to work on that project with you. But are you sure you want to mix business with personal relationships again? I'm sure I want to mix everything with you. Business and personal and whatever else comes along. We figured out how to navigate Hollywood together. I think we can handle a documentary series. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars appear in the clear country sky, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction of decisions made and challenges accepted. His orchard would survive and thrive. His family's agricultural legacy would be preserved and extended. And his relationship with Claire had evolved into partnership that encompassed both professional collaboration and personal affection. The struggling farmer who had given permission for a mysterious woman to paint in his orchard had been transformed into a Hollywood consultant, documentary filmmaker, and agricultural advocate. But the core of who he was, the fourth-generation steward of his family's land, remained unchanged and unchangeable. 3 months later, the film featuring Marcus's orchard opened in theaters across the country to critical acclaim and impressive box office numbers. Reviewers praised the authentic portrayal of farming life, specifically noting the realistic details that elevated the production above typical rural stereotypes. Marcus attended the premiere in Los Angeles wearing a suit that fit properly for the first time in his adult life, accompanied by Claire in an elegant dress that somehow managed to echo the practical beauty of her paint-stained work clothes. As they walked down the red carpet surrounded by photographers and entertainment reporters, Marcus marveled at how far he'd traveled from that morning when financial ruin had seemed inevitable. "Any regrets?" Claire asked as they settled into their seats for the screening. "Only that my grandfather isn't here to see his orchard on the big screen," Marcus replied. "I think he'd get a kick out of knowing that his farming techniques are being studied by Hollywood set designers." The film exceeded Marcus's expectations, capturing not just the visual reality of his orchard, but the emotional weight of generational stewardship that he'd tried to convey to the lead actor. Seeing his life's work, translated into compelling cinema, felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with simple kindness toward a stranger who wanted to paint his trees. During the reception after the premiere, Marcus was approached by representatives from agricultural organizations, environmental groups, and educational institutions who had seen advanced screenings and wanted to discuss potential collaborations. His Hollywood success had indeed created a platform for advocacy work that could benefit farming communities across the country. "The irony is perfect," Claire observed, as they drove home through the Los Angeles night. "You saved your farm by sharing your knowledge about farming, and now you can use your Hollywood success to help save other farms. My grandfather always said that knowledge was only valuable if you shared it with the next generation. I just never imagined my sharing would happen on this scale." 6 months later, Marcus and Claire's documentary series about traditional American farming premiered on a major streaming platform. The 6-episode series featured Marcus visiting family farms across the country, learning traditional techniques from elderly farmers, and helping younger generations understand sustainable agriculture practices. The success of both the theatrical film and the documentary series established Marcus as a prominent voice in conversations about agricultural sustainability and rural economic development. He used his platform to advocate for policies supporting small-scale farming and to create educational programs connecting urban audiences with agricultural realities. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the transformation of his own orchard into a model of sustainable farming success. The Hollywood money had funded state-of-the-art irrigation systems, soil improvement programs, and the planting of diverse heritage fruit varieties that attracted visitors from across the region. Claire had moved permanently to the farm, converting the old equipment barn into a studio where she created paintings that captured agricultural landscapes with the same authentic detail that had made her film set designs so compelling. Their relationship had evolved into marriage, a partnership that encompassed shared professional interests and deep personal affection. Standing in his orchard on a morning that felt remarkably similar to the day Claire had first asked permission to paint, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from struggling farmer to successful agricultural advocate. The same peach trees that had once symbolized his financial desperation now represented the foundation of a diversified enterprise that included film consultation, documentary production, educational programming, and sustainable farming demonstration. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked, approaching with 2 cups of coffee from the expensive cafe that had become their morning tradition. "I'm thinking about possibility," Marcus replied, accepting his coffee and wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders. "About how sometimes the things that seem like our greatest weaknesses turn out to be our most valuable strengths. And what conclusion have you reached?" That authenticity is the rarest and most precious resource in any industry, whether it's farming or filmmaking, and that sharing what we know with people who need to learn it might be the most important work anyone can do. As they stood together in the morning light filtering through leaves that had been recreated in Hollywood studios and featured in documentaries watched by millions, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived with, quote, purpose. His great-grandfather's 20 acres had grown not just in size, but in influence, touching lives and preserving traditions in ways the original Fleming settler could never have imagined. The struggling farmer had indeed let a woman paint his orchard, unaware that she designed Hollywood film sets. But more importantly, he had discovered that his knowledge and experience had value beyond the boundaries of his property, and that sharing that value could create opportunities he'd never dared dream possible. The orchard that had once threatened to bankrupt him had become the foundation of success that honored both tradition and innovation, preserving the best of agricultural heritage while adapting to the realities of a changing world. And the woman who had asked permission to paint in his shade had become not just his professional partner, but his life partner, someone who understood both the weight of generational responsibility and the excitement of creative possibility. As the morning sun rose higher, and the familiar rhythms of farm work called them toward another day of shared labor and shared dreams, Marcus Fleming felt the profound gratitude of someone who had discovered that his authentic self was exactly who the world needed him to be.